Let's jump right into this explainer, because a 2017 Cambridge study fundamentally shattered the long-held myth of the passive cave woman. For decades, we've basically just accepted a very specific and honestly totally unexamined picture of what life was like for prehistoric women. But what happens when modern science actually puts those assumptions under the microscope? Well, it turns out the answers are quite literally written in bone.
Think about it. For generations, pop culture has fed us this exact image. Men are out hunting dangerous game, while women are sitting around a campfire gently gathering berries. It's an image that shaped museum dioramas, textbook illustrations, basically every movie about prehistoric life you've ever seen. But the hard scientific data? It reveals a radically different reality. This wasn't some simple, low-effort division of labor. The evidence shows we need to completely rewrite our entire understanding of early human physical capability. Get this, when researchers at the University of Cambridge compared the arm bones of Neolithic women to modern female rowers, and we're talking about elite athletes here who train for hours every single day, the prehistoric women completely outmatched them. The results are honestly a little embarrassing for anyone currently paying for a gym membership. We are talking about women who lived across roughly 6,000 years of early agricultural history in Central Europe, demonstrating upper body strength that absolutely eclipses today's highly trained competitors.
So, Section 1, Bones Tell the Truth, Reading the Skeleton.
To really grasp how ancient women got access to what looks like a prehistoric CrossFit franchise, we have to talk about a concept called Wolff's Law. You see, bone isn't just a static, dead structure. It's living tissue. When it's placed under heavy, sustained physical demand, bone actually restructures itself to handle that load. It becomes noticeably denser, developing these reinforced ridges. That means these ancient skeletons aren't just passive remains lying in the dirt. They're permanent biological printouts of a person's lifelong physical labor. They record every heavy lift and repetitive strain directly into their biological architecture. And beyond just bone density, researchers are also looking at something called enthesial changes. Basically, these are permanent records left on the bone that indicate sustained, intensive upper body and core activity. They're the specific spots where muscles and tendons attach directly to the bone. When you use those muscles forcefully and repeatedly over a lifetime, it leaves a very measurable mark. And when you look at these ancient female skeletons, those marks completely obliterate that low-effort gathering stereotype.
Moving on to Section 2, the daily prehistoric workout, sustained physical labor.
So what exactly was this daily prehistoric workout? Like, what were they actually doing every single day to build this elite-level strength? Well, before mechanized milling, women spent hours upon hours leaning their full body weight into stone corns just to grind grain. That is multi-hour near-daily full-body resistance training. Then you have hauling heavy loads of water, firewood, and children over long distances. That's essentially sustained, weighted, functional strength training. And let's not forget processing tough animal hides into leather, a task that demands immense grip strength and shoulder stability. We're talking about a daily, unrelenting physical grind.
But wait, it doesn't stop there. Out on top of that, the demanding upper body strength required for things we often mistakenly dismiss as just crafts. Think about kneading heavy clay, operating manual potter's wheels, and spinning fiber on manual looms for entire workdays. And here's the absolute kicker. These women were doing all of this while repeatedly managing the massive physical toll of pregnancy and enduring childbirth without an ounce of modern pain management. They maintained this extraordinary baseline of physical resilience through conditions that are honestly pretty hard for us to fully wrap our heads around today.
Now, contrary to what we might assume about human progress, the shift to settled agriculture actually intensified the physical demands on women's bodies. Moving away from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle meant relentless planting, weeding, and harvesting. It really complicates that simple, comforting narrative we have that farming made life gentler or easier. Because for the women actually living through that transition, the manual labor burden only got heavier.
Let's dive into Section 3, Man the Hunter, Rethinking Old Models.
Okay, so for a very long time, we just assumed women were entirely confined to domestic and agricultural tasks, but we really need to talk about hunting. In a genuinely landmark 2020 study, archaeologists examined a 9,000-year-old burial site in the Andes called Willamea Patricia, and what they found there was wild. They discovered a young female intentionally buried right alongside a specialized toolkit for processing and hunting big game. Projectile points, processing tools, they were positioned exactly as they would be for a male hunter. This single discovery basically forced the entire scientific community to take a massive step back and reevaluate everything.
Because when scientists decided to revisit broader excavation data across the Americas, the results were absolutely staggering. They found that between 30 to 50% of big game hunter burials were actually female. We're looking at a 40% average here. That completely proves that female participation in big game hunting wasn't just some rare one-off anomaly. It was a common, accepted, and incredibly vital role within these populations all along. And we even see this adaptability in contemporary hunter-gatherer groups today, like the Agta people in the Philippines. In their society, women regularly hunt big game with bows and other tools, and they frequently do this while simultaneously managing childcare. It's incredible. It just proves that survival labor in non-industrial societies was always pragmatically organized based on immediate practical needs and individual skill. It was never rigidly separated by those strict gender lines we've built up in our popular imagination.
Which brings us to Section 4, Archaeological Bias, Uncovering Assumptions.
So this begs a really big question. If the physical evidence was always right there in the dirt, and the bone density was always there to be studied, why on earth did it take an entire century for us to figure this out? Well, the answer, unfortunately, is institutional bias. For decades, earlier archaeologists would simply find hunting tools in graves and just automatically assume the skeleton had to be a male hunter. They took their own rigid 1950s cultural expectations about what men and women naturally do, and they projected them directly backward onto prehistoric data without a second thought. The default interpretation was just systematically wrong.
But thankfully, science is a process that actively corrects itself. Modern researchers are now relying on advanced CT scanning, sophisticated statistical modeling, and highly refined skeletal sex determination methods. So instead of just looking at the grave goods and guessing, they're analyzing the biological remains directly. By using tools that are far less culturally biased, researchers are finally overturning these outdated assumptions, rather than just defending them out of pure institutional inertia.
And this rigorous new analysis has led to another completely fascinating realization. The physical strength gap between men and women that we largely take for granted today, it's not some fixed biological constant. Research suggests that in earlier populations, the relative difference in upper body strength was notably smaller. It really looks like the gap was actually widened over time by specialized historical labor patterns, specifically as societies shifted into later agricultural and industrial phases. I want to end on this quote because it perfectly captures the absolute essence of this explainer. Prehistoric women were performing incredibly impressive, foundational physical labor. Their bodies were heavily muscled, highly adapted to extreme survival conditions, and absolutely essential to their communities. The truth was quite literally embedded in their dense, heavily loaded skeletal structures. Our culture just refused to look at the printout until now. So today, as museums finally begin updating their dioramas and textbooks to reflect this much more empowering and honestly accurate reality, it leaves us with a pretty critical question. When we look back at history, are we really seeing the past, or are we just staring into a mirror of our own present? What other established historical facts are just sitting there waiting for a closer look? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you think you know.